Welcome to The Human Way. I'm your host, Matt Havens. This is a podcast focused on people doing good by focusing on the similarities that we all share instead of what pulls us apart. At the end of the day, we're all human. So let's dive in. Hey, everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Human Way. I am your host, Matt Havens. Thank you for tuning in wherever you're watching it or listening to it. I greatly appreciate it. But folks, I'm excited. We have a special guest in the house today. Yes, you've heard it right. With a new podcast, we have our first guest appearance on. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to Justin Fox. And I'm going to kind of like read a little bit of this, Justin, because I don't want to get this wrong. There's so much stuff that's in here, and I know the conversation is going to be fun. But Justin is an operations leader with the National Veterinary Associates. He's a veteran of the Army, former small business owner. I like to call him a sports psychology guru, if that's okay. Father to two daughters, very active ones, I think we can both agree on. Yeah. And he brings 20 years of leadership experience to the conversation. Justin, welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, so I'm a special guest due to being the first one. So I win by default, right?
Yeah, I mean, either way you want to look at it. I look at it as, so Justin and I met just recently, maybe a couple weeks ago. And our daughters do go to the same school. And so we, you know, as most parents do, you try to meet who your kids are friends with. And, 3 hours later into a conversation, I was like, Justin's, man, this is an interesting story. It's business. It's, the personal side as well. And in a show where we're just looking to have conversations with good people, I was like, I got to get this guy on. So that's why you're the first, because we spent some time and had a good time doing it.
It's funny how your social life revolves around your children after a certain age, and you're totally judging your friends based on their children. Like if my daughter's got a friend and then I meet her parents and then I go back through the judgment cycle based on the relationship with the kids.
It does. Well, yeah, it's
he raises good kids. I like this guy.
Yeah, exactly. It's the exact same way. And sometimes I'll be honest, I look at the kids and I'm like, well, what are their parents like? Yeah. This is a fun kid, so their parents must be fun too.
That's can go the other way. Can go the other way.
It can. But so Justin, there's a lot I kind of want to get into and talk about today. First off, a big part of your history and past is serving in the military. So thank you for your service in that regard, and we'll get into that a little bit. But I want to start off with kind of a question. I did somewhat prep you for this, but last podcast episode we talked about what's our favorite failure, and the listeners of the show had to listen to me ramble on about my favorite failure, and so I thought, what better way to start a podcast than to talk about a time that you failed, because that's the way to start conversations. So, So Justin, do you mind just sharing a little bit about maybe one of your favorite failures in work or in life?
Yeah. So, I was thinking about this question. I actually really got stumped on it. I sat there and thought about it for probably 5 or 10 minutes, and I couldn't really come up with a failure that stood out. And I think that really kind of generates from just this philosophy of you win or learn, not necessarily win or lose. I can't look at any single moment in life where I just absolutely failed, because I've always gained something from the experience. So I'm sitting here kind of on my high horse thinking, I've never failed. I've only gained experience. And I look at that as a win, even if the outcome wasn't what I desired. So I rehashed that question a little bit and then realized, well, I'm probably failing all the time. And that experience I gained from it. I think the one that stands out is being a family man, right? Because there's no roadmap to how to be a parent, how to be a husband. You've got all these books and all the stuff, like what to expect when you're expecting, and there's a whole industry of relationship books out there. But what those books can't do is they can't know your child or your spouse, and they can't know you. So the caveat to that is that you've got some broad generalizations, but in a world of generalizations, I think the nuance is what's important. And that's what you don't get. And so not having that level of detail sets you up to just run into a brick wall almost on a daily basis. But even then, I think with the right communication style, as long as things are coming from a place of love, you can take what those failures are, and apply them to the next go round. Fortunately, with family, like, you get as many do-overs as you want. So like, your kids will love you regardless of how crappy of a father you are that day. We know that our spouses probably get the worst from us because they're the catch-all at the end of the day. And so I think for me, if I'm going to be honest, and I think if anybody's going to be honest, they're going to have to look at those relationships that mean the most to them and understand that those are probably the best relationships due to the tolerance of your everyday failures.
So I love that. Absolutely. Now, first off, I'm sad because I was really hoping that you were going to give me the parenting book that I could follow along with and like figure these kids out.
Yeah.
So I thought that's where you were going with that, and I was really excited.
No.
But I think, but you're absolutely right. Like, I mean, you either look at, and that's why I like using the word failure, right? Like, what's your favorite failure? Because you either view these things as failures, or you perceive those quote unquote failures as this opportunity to learn and grow, and that they're absolutely necessary, to our development.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what you're describing. But I also loved how you said, like for children in particular. So these family relationships where they will love you no matter what. And they allow us to fail, and we don't really think twice about it. We don't think twice about the times that we're not the best parent or spouse. Maybe they eat at us in the moment, right? But then we're quick to adapt and learn and grow. And how powerful that would be if we applied that same thing in business more often and realize that like those failures are going to happen. So like, have you always sort of had this mentality about, your failures or learning and growing, or was there something that ever like clicked for you that helped maybe like put that into your psyche?
It's funny, like, as a kid, I was like riddled with this, inferiority complex. I think, there's a lot of research that's done on birth order and things like that. I was in a unique position because I was my mom's first. So I was the first and only for a while. Then my parents split and got remarried. And so I inherited two older siblings. So then I was the youngest. Then my mom and my stepfather had a child. So then I went to the middle. And so I started off with all the attention, then started off being the youngest, and again, having all the attention, and then going to kind of the middle of the pack where I didn't have all the attention. And so I think for me, after like years of analyzing this, especially when you get a psychology degree, like you analyze yourself, you diagnose yourself crazy. I think for me as a child, I was young for my age. I graduated high school at 17. So I was always a little bit immature, and that I was a rowdy youngster. I'm probably still a little rowdy. But then the military, and you touched on this a minute ago, the military was one of those areas where you look back in life and you just realize you got a real lucky break. I had great leaders and I just lucked into that. Not all leaders in the military are great, but I lucked into having some really good ones. And in boot camp, like right out of the gate, a guy I'm still friends with, my drill sergeant Dove, I'm in the push-up position. We're all miserable, raining. And he said something that kind of resonated with me. He said, get comfortable being uncomfortable. And so I have lived, I don't know why that just like, that hit a nerve with me. And I was like, oh, if you get comfortable being uncomfortable, you're never uncomfortable. And so everything for me and kind of how I've developed over the years and how I continue to develop, if you wanted to reverse engineer that all the way back to the cornerstone, that one phrase, get comfortable being uncomfortable, probably is going to be where it all started.
Yeah. And happens to you at a time that you probably weren't expecting it, or, had specific plans. So yeah, I love that. And you say you're a little bit rowdy, maybe still. I don't know. You do have a tiger shirt on for anybody who's watching this on YouTube. It is pretty sweet. I kind of want one. What you said you got that at Target?
I'm telling you, the t-shirt game at Target is off the charts.
Man, I need to step.
I mean, you can go in, you can get almost any t-shirt on the planet for like $12 max. Sometimes they're on sale for $6.99.
See, that's the way to go. I think that's why Megan, my wife, spends so much time just walking the halls at Target. Don't like necessarily buy anything.
That's just your wife. That's all.
It might be a lot male and women, but it's like her idea of fun is not necessarily going to buy something at Target, but it's just aimlessly walking around the aisles just to see what's there. So,
well, first of all, no one can just go to Target. Like that's $100 trip regardless. Like you can go in for a pack of gum and you walk out with one of those like nasal cleaners for $100. You're like, yeah, I'm never going to have allergies.
that's me in Costco.
Minty fresh.
That's me in Costco. I go to Costco and come out with 2 things and it's $140. So
yeah.
But yeah, so I'm curious to maybe talk a little bit more about your military experience. And we can jump into this now or a little bit later as well too. But so you obviously you spent time in the military and then after leaving the military got into some various businesses. But when you look back, like specific to that military experience, in addition to the get comfortable being uncomfortable, which I love that sort of mentality. What are there any other sort of experiences or what else from kind of going through the military and that experience helped kind of either shape your leadership today or gave you kind of those stories that you continue to use now?
Yeah, well, again, I got lucky with my first leaders, in boot camp. And then I continued to just kind of strike gold from a leadership perspective. And it was lead by example, leaders eat last, just embodying what a leader should be in today's world, especially when everybody in some shape, form, or fashion is going to be a leader. So people are going to look at you no matter what position you're in from a linear perspective. You can be a leader no matter what. And that's leading by example, even if from an authority range, you may not be at the top, but you can set an example for others. So for me, it was just the basics. And again, there's an entire industry on leadership out there. I've contributed quite a lot of money to it, taking courses and things like that. But I think you learn in the military something that's very important, which is if you don't take care of the people that are working for you, they won't take care of you. Russell Branson's big on this. And I think, I've taken a lot of body punches for my team. If they screw up, you've got to own it. And you got to say, hey, I'm their leader. It's on me. Leave them alone. There was one, if we have time for a quick story. Of
course.
So we're in Afghanistan and there's some downtime. Like people think when you go to war, like you're, shooting and bombing 24/7. Well, that's not necessarily the case. Like there could be days or weeks where you literally have nothing to do but eat and work out and get in trouble. So in terms of the last one, we ordered, and you can order stuff from Amazon when you're deployed, which is great. So we ordered a water balloon launcher.
Oh, no.
And this was my whole platoon. And the chem lights, which are basically the glow sticks that you break. Well, there's what's called IR chem lights. Those are infrared. So you can only see them through night vision goggles. It just would look like water otherwise. And so we would take those, cut them open, pour the contents into a water balloon, fill it up the rest of the way, and then we would launch these water balloons across the base. And we would have guys like up with night vision goggles. And it was like we were playing war while we were at war, right? So we'd have our forward observers. We'd be launching at other platoons and stuff like that.
So you'd have positions. You'd have people like playing specific roles and positions.
Yeah,
of the game. Okay.
It's totally like men being kids, but we're actually using the training in the tools that we have, military grade tools to play war. And so we're launching these water balloons, and this goes on for a few weeks. And then one day we were doing this. We did it all at night, and we almost hit a command sergeant major. And I mean, that's like a big deal. And my platoon sergeant took the fall for all of us. I mean, we could have been in trouble. And I just realized, like, as a leader, like, he took care of us, but when we're outside the wire driving around and things are going crazy, like, we're the ones taking care of him. And so that was another moment in that military career. It's just, you got to do the basics of leadership. People make this out to be like super complicated. You just got to do the basics, lead by example, make sure that your people are taken care of, be willing to do anything that you're asking someone else to do. My job now in the animal hospital is like, I'm well beyond the pay grade of having to clean up pee on the floor. I do it almost every day though. And it's not because I need to do it or we have someone else that won't do it. I've got plenty of people that will do it, but I do it so my team sees me do it. They see me make an effort to show them that we're all on the same team. And if there's something that needs done, like, I'm part of that team, not just the manager of it. And so, it's not super complicated. You just have to care enough to know your team and know that you have to take care of them so that they in turn can take care of you.
I 100% agree with that. I actually had I had a previous leader of mine. This was a corporate environment, and he would, just like you said, I mean, constantly like walking around the office building, picking up pieces of paper on the ground, anything that like looked out of order. And I remember like one conversation where it was, you wondered if like, does he just have severe OCD and like can't have something out of place? Or what's going on? And his response was very similar. It's like, if I don't care enough to like make our workplace, do something as simple as, pick up trash off the ground, how am I going to expect anybody else to want to do that? And those simple acts do kind of show the human side of who you are, of leadership, and it kind of brings down those walls that people might have. That they put up this wall of management or leadership or whoever it is, like us versus them, and it's simple acts like that that can go a long way towards breaking down those walls.
Yeah, there's a saying called, "If you don't address it, you bless it."
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. So like if I'm too good to pick up trash off the ground, if I don't address it, then that's the new standard, right? It's just to leave trash on the ground. So it serves both ways.
But another thing too, I think that is important for people to understand is also kind of to what you said was like, it doesn't matter if you have a formal title, like everybody is a leader. Everybody you look up to, everybody you see in the community, they're leaders in their own regard. And I can't tell you how many times I've held workshops or things at conferences where, we might be talking about leadership and somebody comes up beforehand, says, "Hey, I'm not in a formal leadership role. I don't have people underneath me. Is this going to be something that I should sit in on?"
Yeah.
And it's you almost have to like break down that mentality of, well, do you have kids? Oh yeah, I've got a couple kids. Okay, so you're a leader to them.
Yep.
Do you just sit in your house, or do you ever go out in the community and do things? Oh yeah, I'm involved in my church, or I'm involved in this. Okay, yeah. So it's like recognizing, the role that leadership plays, and that really everybody is a leader. So you told us one funny story though of maybe some shenanigans you got into. You did tell me another story that I think the audience might like hearing a little bit about, maybe some other time that you didn't get in trouble, but you have an interesting story about jumping out of a plane. And I was curious if you might share with everybody that story a little bit.
Yeah. So just a little background for everybody that's listening or watching. I spent 12 years in fitness and nutrition, whether I was doing training, running boot camps, online coaching, nutrition coaching, and then eventually opening up, supplement stores. And this story is kind of the genesis of all that. So when I was going through airborne school, which is not particularly difficult, you just have to learn all the stuff and then do 5 jumps, get qualified, and then you're airborne qualified. So that's the first step, in being part of an airborne unit, which is that beret was from the 82nd Airborne, which is where I spent most of my time. But the last jump in airborne school is a night jump, and it's a combat jump. And what that means is you've got gear, right? You're just jumping with a weapon and a pack. And what you want to do as you're falling is you want to either catch the treetops, right? So that gives you an idea of how far up you are, around 100 feet. And then you release your pack and it drops on a tether. And then you feel that tether hit. And when you feel or hear that, then you kind of get in your position to do your parachute landing fall. And kind of, it's just a way to say you just roll through the fall. So that night when we jumped, it was kind of foggy and it was cool. And what a lot of people don't realize that aren't military is when the air is cooler, you fall faster. Mm-hmm. And so I'm looking around, trying to find a treetop. I can't see much. I can't see anybody else. And I'm trying to figure out like when I'm supposed to release this pack I have, and I can't find a treetop. So I look down, and when I look down, like gear and everything attached, I hit. Oh. And so I thought I broke everything in my body. Come to find out later, it was I blew out 2 discs in my lower back. But having that experience, well, one, I was a newbie in the military, and you don't say anything. You just get up and kind of walk it off and keep your mouth shut. And you don't want to get recycled back to the start of the class. That was my last jump. So I ended up going through the rest of my military career with that injury, which ended up being the reason I had to exit the military. But, there's a lot of really good doctors in the Army, but when it comes to like fixing stuff, sometimes you can do better on the outside. And I didn't really like any of the treatment options. It was, kill the nerves, fuse the back, just a lot of this like non-specific way to deal with it. And so when I got out of the military, I was like, what, I'm gonna heal myself. And that's what started the 12 years of fitness and nutrition and just kind of being strong and in shape.
Yeah. So, so something that would have landed the majority of people, maybe bedridden for some time, in a hospital, like you said, different strategies that you may have to go through multiple surgeries. And really that was kind of maybe a little bit of a springboard into the next, phase of your career, phase of your life. That's another thing that a lot of people kind of go through is the transition from military to civilian life or working life outside of the military. What was that transition like when you discharged from the military and then went in and started this sort of nutrition coaching and ultimately a few companies there?
Yeah. So you could look at that, like that jump as a failure, right? But it also allowed me to be passionate about what ended up being my career for the next decade, and learning how to be a business operator. So again, that's, that may be my favorite failure there, is because it's literally why I'm at where I'm at now. I'll say though, the transition, and I don't think this really gets enough airtime, is like the transition for me was the hardest part of being in the military. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I just had a friend who I lost overseas. We were fraternity brothers. And so he had just died like 2 weeks before I was actually like done. So, there's a ton of guilt there because you got brothers that are still in. I mean, I still have brothers that are in, and there's a ton of guilt leaving, even though I was leaving on like medical reasons. Like, should I just kept my mouth shut if I could still be in? And then those guys that get out just on their own accord, there's just a ton of emotion wrapped up in that. And in the military, as long as you can follow directions, it's fairly easy. You have a place to eat, you have a place to sleep. Someone's going to tell you where to be, what to do. It's not hard to execute in the military when everything's kind of structured for you. When you get out, there's like this, for me, it was about 6 months where I was just like, what the hell am I going to do with my life? Fortunately, I was near a beach, and so I spent 6 months on the beach figuring it out. It's a good place to kind of
that's a good place to figure it out. Yeah.
Yeah. Florida's not a bad place to like figure out your life,
Exactly.
But that transition was difficult.
And how old are you at this point? when you're making this transition?
2007. So yeah.
Okay. But I mean, I think that's what, so, you mentioned the emotions of coming from military and active duty and being overseas to then, finding something that you're passionate about for personal reasons, and ultimately, using that as a springboard to business. So like, what was that journey, that journey to just start straight into rehabbing yourself and then doing it for others, or how did that transition come full circle?
Yeah, so money runs out. Can't sit on the beach any longer. I have a brother and a sister that live in Austin, Texas. So I moved in with my brother. We still debate whether it was, 2 weeks or 2 months of how long I lived with him, but didn't have a lot going for me. Prospect wise, ended up applying at a gym, getting a personal trainer job. I was the worst personal trainer on the planet. For all of you that worked with me, like around 2008, I'm sorry. But getting that job at that gym taught me a couple of things. One, I was surrounded by a lot of top-notch trainers. I was able to not only take what they're doing, but also take how they learned to do it, and then, take it a step further in terms of training myself and also learning how to train others. And then it also taught me how to run a business, because as a personal trainer, like you're always selling yourself, right? You are the product. And so, I got a lot of good stuff out of that. And that's kind of what led me into getting the psychology degree, because I realized that during these training sessions, people are just, verbal diarrhea. They'll tell you everything. And I was like, I'm not qualified for this. So, ended up getting into psychology and sports psychology. And I think that degree, not necessarily the degree, but the things that I learned from a psychological component taught me another founding principle, is that we're all in the people business, right? So I may work at animal hospitals, but I'm in the people business. Mm-hmm. I may have owned companies that sell supplements, but I'm in the people business, because people is what, that's commerce. It has to happen between people. Robots not buying my stuff. I can't train a robot. They're not going to buy my stuff. I have to talk to people, have to be able to connect with people. And, so again, like that one failure of a bad airborne jump, which leads me to getting out of the military, which leads me to go down the fitness career to fix my back, led me into learning how to be a business owner and learning sales, and then learning psychology. And then that puts me in a position where I can transfer all that into what I'm doing now. And who knows where I'll be 2 years from now. So, maybe we answered that question.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful. And but it's, I think you found that sense of purpose, and were able to make that transition from military to being a business owner, to working at a business as well too, and navigating that. Cause sometimes that's a challenge. As a past corporate leader, I had some folks from the military who were on my team, and it's at times, unfortunately, it was tough for some of them to make the jump, or even worse, as they came into more of like the corporate environment, they had their military like training and leadership that they had gained from going through the military had almost been like beaten out of them. And what I mean by that is like, just some of the things that you said, like the basics of, if I'm asked to do something, I do it. I give it my all, give it my best attempt. Over the years, sometimes some of these former, military leaders in the working world, they had been taught that, oh, that's too aggressive, or, this isn't the military here at XYZ company. So, you can't act like that. And I think that's unfortunate sometimes, if we allow the learnings that can happen coming from the military, if we don't at least like help foster that transition into the working world. But it sounds like you've kind of figured out how to do that. Is there any tips or advice for anybody kind of making that transition of how to make it go as smooth as possible?
Yeah. So the advice probably is in stark contrast to, my beliefs. Like you said, you have to convert how you approach people in a situation and soften those up. You have to work on soft skills. In the military, no one cares about your feelings, mm-hmm. right? It's mission first. I think the real world could use more of that, right? I think the real world or the corporate world could adopt some of those more straightforward approaches, because now, you know, everything's soft. Everybody gets offended. If someone gets offended, there's a whole to do. And I don't think one or the other is the right way to do it. The answer is probably somewhere in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
But I think in terms of like tips, I've made all the mistakes that you just talked about, you know, being too aggressive, being too blunt, speaking in a tone that is too military, you know, in style, and having to tone it down and just understand that you do have to address people's feelings. So like I said, there's some middle ground, there's some give and take. You know, my tips for guys in the military would be to find an outlet where you can still express that side of your personality, because I don't think it's something you want to put a lid on. I just think you have to compartmentalize a little bit. Maybe find a jujitsu gym or a boxing coach, or, you know, a bunch of guys that want to work out or get into some sort of outdoor, you know, racing, tough mudders, things like that. Like, give that warrior side of yourself an outlet, so that when you do go into a more corporate and professional setting, that you're able to not have that just screaming to get out, because It's really hard. And I don't think it's a bad thing to have. I think it's a part of being a human from the animalistic side of who we are, where it's a survival mechanism. I think that that's an important component to hold on to. It makes us human. Sometimes you go into these meetings in corporate offices and it's almost a different language from this corporate speak. You know, It's like people are talking at each other. They're not really talking to each other. It's like a sitcom on TV, you know, from The Office, but in reverse. It's not funny. It's super serious.
Yeah, it's not nearly
over the top. And it's like, well, Becky, today I'd like to worry about the agenda that we have to go through for Q2. What are your proposals on moving forward? It's like, why can't we just say, hey, what are we going to do over the next 3 months? Mm-hmm. It's not working. But instead, we've got this whole language that we have to speak. And I understand that that's necessary, because the company's first job is not to get sued, right? So we have to like tiptoe around some of these things. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but I'm also saying that the military and that like survival side of it, that's not a bad thing either. You just need to be able to express those two directions in separate areas. So
yeah. And I think absolutely. And I think it comes down to something you said earlier, which is just about like caring about people. And that's one of the things that I think is so important in the military. And I've never served myself, so you can tell me I'm completely off on this, but you know, part of the function and the foundation of basic training is to, in a way, stripe out a little bit of the individuality that people have, to say like, hey, we're in this together. Like we need to be a team. We need to look out for each other. We need to have each other's back. And so we're going to go through some exercises and things that will help us individually, but ultimately it's also to develop this team. And I think if you take that same approach into a corporate environment, or you take it into a business that you're leading and say, hey, we're a team and we care about each other. It's okay to, you know, have these strong emotions about each other. And at the end, when we make mistakes, we're going to have each other's back. And when we need to push each other, it's okay to do that too. And we don't have to necessarily always worry about, did I say the right thing? You'll give me grace if I mess up. You'll give me grace if I'm too aggressive, or if I don't say it the right way, because we've built that foundation. But unfortunately, I think sometimes ad organizations or where businesses go off is when they don't take the time to build that foundation first. Because then, something you say might be taken the wrong way, and you haven't spent enough time building the relationship for them to then give you grace in those situations.
Well, I think you nailed it with give you grace. And I think if we break this down and unpack it a little bit, you know, you hit on a lot of good things. The reason that happens in the military is it's implied, right? If my leader or, you know, someone who works for me, if they yell at me or say something in a rough way, like, I'm giving them grace by default, because we've already built a relationship. We already have stripped it down. We've got trust. And I think it comes down to trust, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
In the military, you trust each other. So almost anything goes. If you heard the way that I talk to my best friends in the military, like the, you know, help me hide the body friends, like, we talk to each other worse than you would ever hear anybody. And it's all because we love each other. It all comes from a place of love. knowing that you care about something is very important. And when you said it's okay to be passionate, passion is just a form of caring. So that's not to be, we don't need to dismiss that. Having someone be passionate about something, although it may not feel good on the receiving end, the positive component to that is they give it.
Mm-hmm.
And so knowing that allows a little bit of trust to be formed. And for me, something that I've always been fairly good at is like connecting with people early. And the reason is because I'm imperfect and show that, like I'm very authentic about that. I'm okay saying that, I mess up or I do this or I do that. And by me being human, it allows the other person to be human. If I started off that conversation with you the first day we met, and it was like, so what do you like to do on the weekends? And how's family life going? How was Christmas? Like, we're not going to get to this point in a little over, 2 weeks. I was pretty honest with you about everything, right?
Yeah.
And then you're able to reciprocate that because you see that I'm not playing a game. We have trust right away, because if you trust me to be myself, then you can be yourself.
Yep.
And now, if I get out of line just a little bit, you're going to give me grace because we have that relationship first. So I think it does come down to relationships. And I think most relationships have to have a foundation of trust, whether that's, romantic, parent to child, soldier to soldier, employer to employee, and it has to go both ways. So maybe that's where we need to focus, is building better relationships in the workplace versus building professional relationships in the workplace. Because you might be Susie Q, VP of marketing, and I might be Justin Fox, head, mailroom guy. But if we don't have a relationship professional, if it's super professional, like, and I mess up, are you going to give me grace? But if we have a relationship where it's like, hey, Justin, you gave me the mail the other day, I misplaced it. Like, I screwed up. And I can go, oh, you screwed up. I screw up sometimes too. Let me see what I can do to help, So, and what's tough in the corporate world is like, it's all areas of gray. Like, are we supposed to have only professional relationships, and do those professional relationships only exclude us from having the trust that we need to move forward? If we have more than a professional relationship, are we outside the realm of what's considered appropriate? So there's a lot of muddy waters here. And that's why I say, sometimes that military, like, hey, just mission first, check your feelings. It's not that big a deal. Like, don't get offended because I said something that struck you the wrong way, and I don't know what the right answer is, because some things are out of bounds. Some things you just got to let slide.
No, absolutely. But you touched on a point that I think is super important for anybody listening to understand is, like, I'm a firm believer that, especially with like the coming of technology and the internet and these sort of digital worlds that we're living in, that line between your personal life and your work life, there used to be some strong divides there. I mean, it used to be work. You went from 8 to 5, and as soon as you clocked out at 5, now your personal life started. And, people would oftentimes put up those walls to say, oh, nope, that's work. Nope, I'm over here in personal. And, you wouldn't even see people that you worked with outside in the real world. And with this digital sort of transformation happening, that line is basically gone. Like, who you are at home is who you are going to be at work. And if you're playing the game, like you said, right? If you're playing this game of, oh, I've got to be professional Matt today, I'm going to pretty quickly and easily figure out that professional Matt isn't the same Matt outside of work. And you know what? More often than not, I probably want to see that outside of work Matt than I do the professional side.
And so does everybody else.
And so does everybody else. Yeah. So, there has to be this realization that it's okay to blur those lines, because if you're still trying to put up a wall, they're going to see right through it.
I think there's some generational stuff to consider there. Yeah. You used to be able to do your 9 to 5, go home, and, 1940s, what's for dinner, honey?
Yeah.
I had a saying, like, and it depends on where you're at in terms of career. Like, sometimes you just do want to go to work and come home and be, there are some jobs that just go to work, punch your clock, come home. Like if you're content where you're at in life and you're just collecting the check, punching the clock, going home, like I'm not talking to you. But if you're on the side of life that you're trying to like do something and you look at success as something greater than just a transaction every 2 weeks, like there is no work life and personal life. It's just life.
It's just life.
It's just life, especially if you want to do something great with it. You spend the majority of your life at work. You better get to know that person, and it better be fairly aligned with who you are outside of work. And if those two things can't exist in the same spectrum in the same area, then you probably need to find another job, because you're going to go nuts. And when you're 60, you're going to look back and realize you wasted 40 plus hours a week wearing a mask and playing a role. And that sucks.
Oh, it does. Well said, Justin. Well said. So man, we could probably continue to go down that path for quite some time, because I think you're speaking my language as far as this ability to just be yourself at all times and finding alignment in work, in your leadership teams, with being that person. If you don't have that alignment, you either need to go find it at a different organization, you need to go do it on your own. You need to have some conversations with yourself about like what's important to you.
I think the goal is to figure out how you can be your authentic self at work without crossing the line.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. Because I understand, I don't want to sit here and say like, hey, I love bourbon. I can't do that at work. So like, obviously, like there's some caveats to this conversation, but I think you got to try to get close.
Yeah.
And if the person you are outside of work is not tolerated inside of work, then you've got a couple options. If you love your job, then maybe you aren't the person you really want to be outside of work, and maybe you need to tune yourself up a little bit. If you don't love your job and you are two totally different people, maybe it's time to consider doing something else.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't want anybody to take what we're saying differently. If you are a jerk as a person and you're a jerk at work, the people at work aren't the problem, you are the problem, right?
Exactly.
But if you can be yourself, and if you're not yourself at work, then you have to ask yourself those questions. Why is that, and how can I either find that spot, or just like you said, if you're the negative person in the room all the time and you look around and you can't find out why everybody else is being negative, well, then maybe you're the reason, and maybe it's time for you to go figure out something else that makes you happy.
Yeah, for sure.
So one last thing I want to talk to you about, just maybe briefly here, is because obviously, you're working with the National Veterinary Association now, but before that, with just all of your role in health, and training and just kind of understanding the body and sports psychology. I'm curious because I've done another podcast. Another big thing I talk about a lot is how we find community, like how we find our sense of purpose and something to belong to, and what's important to us. And I believe strongly that like health is a big form of community. I make the joke that if you're into CrossFit, everybody knows you're into CrossFit because you're going to talk about it.
You stole my example.
Yeah, but maybe right. It's the example that people know, and like right now, my wife and I we're macroing, so we're, I'm not gonna lie to anybody. I let myself go a little bit towards the end of 2020. I stopped making the right decisions when it came to what I eat, and I like to work out. And I like to do that just for the purposes of, I want to be able to eat whatever I want.
Calories on credit.
Exactly. Calories on credit. And so, my credit card balance got a little too high. So we're macroing now. And just because of that, if anybody wants to talk about it, I love to talk about it, because health is this community and you're like open to it. So obviously that's very important to you. I'm assuming that's a sort of a place where you found community. But as somebody who's also like extremely knowledgeable about it, like what's some advice or what's something that you would say that you've learned about health that you might be able to share with somebody who else is looking to find community in that space?
Yeah, I think the main thing people need to know on the nutrition side of it is there's a ton of different ways to accomplish your goal. Like counting macros is one of them. And the analogy that I use is like, if we're in Dallas, Texas, there are a lot of roads that lead into Dallas, Texas that all end up in the same place. You just pick your road and stay on that road. Find the one that gets you there in the manner that you enjoy the most. So from a nutrition component, we could spend an entire week, 8 hours a day going down those rabbit holes and exploring all the different options. I love what you said about community. I think most people, they want to feel like they're significant and they want to feel like they have a purpose. Feeling significant comes from doing stuff with other people, and purpose is like having a goal and working towards that goal, or doing something where you feel like the energy matters to something or someone else. Even if that, is you sometimes. I love working out in a group. I could be your quintessential meathead, for an hour and a half in the gym, just broing out with guys. And I think, like you said, CrossFit, what's the first thing what's the first thing people about CrossFit tell you is that they're in CrossFit. And, regardless of how I feel about the program design and some of the moves, they struck gold, right? From a psychological standpoint, it's a cult, right? It's a cult. It's not a bad one.
No.
Everybody says cults are bad, but like cults are just people that have a similar belief and they have a strong purpose to be together and express that. And so, the CrossFit cult and that's why they're so successful.
Hey,
especially you put people in these highly charged environments where they're, like I said, you're going back to that primal survival feeling. They're getting comfortable being uncomfortable. Like, we are not meant to have an easy life. Everything that we do to make ourselves more comfortable is making life harder on us. Like, you got to struggle. You got to struggle physically. You've got to struggle mentally, because that allows the easy times to feel easy. If everything's easy, that's just normal. And there's no like reward component with it. But I know you want me to talk about like specific, like if you can get in the gym 3 to 4 times a week and move, if you're one of these people that just looking for a place to start, get in the gym and just move. There is so much stuff online for free these days. Just Google or YouTube, like beginner workout in the gym, and then just go and do it, or just go for a walk. Just do something 3 or 4 times a week. I think the mistake most people think is like they have their end goal and then they go trying to do the things that a person that is already there would do. But
absolutely.
You've got like 900 steps to go. You need to figure out who you are now. What does that person need to do? What is step one? And that's what everybody says, the journey, right? And there's, we make fun of like, oh, I'm on my journey, but like, that's what it really is. It's a linear progression of consistency. Consistency is what matters. And to have consistency, you have to have discipline. Motivation is going to come and go. Like, I can get up and I can give a speech and I can motivate the hell out of people. What are they going to feel like tomorrow?
Yeah.
I'm reading a book called Atomic Habits right now, and they talked about, every Olympian goes to the Olympics. They all have the same goal. Everybody wants to win the gold medal, but like only one person does. And they talk to this person like, well, what did you do? Oh, I just had this goal. Well, yeah, so did everybody else. But what did you do? They had discipline and habits, right? Yep. They had consistency. They put in more work over a longer period of time. And so that's my main piece of advice, is like, figure out a way that you can be consistent, that you're uncomfortable enough to realize it, but not so uncomfortable that it's not worth it. Figure out a way to get small wins, whatever those are. Championships are won on base hits. The home runs make the front page, but the base hits got the championship. So you need to figure out a way to get on base every day, whether that's, before I go inside and take my shoes off, I'm walking around the block.
Yep.
That's a win. You can feel good about that. And regardless of what anybody thinks, like, you've got to feel good about what's happening. So you've got to find this kind of like two-sided coin of like, I've got to get uncomfortable, because being uncomfortable and changing my environment is what makes my body change. But I've also got to be able to feel good about it at the same time, so it's worth doing tomorrow. And so goes back to like dopamine receptors and things like that. Like, this is why people get addicted to working out. The people that are addicted to working out are the same as the people that are addicted to going to work, that are addicted to drugs. It's all the same system.
Yep.
It's just, is it positive or negative in your life? And so you've got to figure out a way to reward yourself consistently while also embracing the struggle a little bit. Like you got to embrace the suck. It needs to suck a little bit. That's what people in really good shape are good at, is they have rewired their brain so that the pain and discomfort of working out is the reward.
Yeah.
But that happens over a long period of time. You can't go train like a football player if you've been sitting on the couch for 5 years. You will never do it again. But you can walk around the block 4 times a week, right? And the other thing, consistency is going to be the main thing. We kind of reverse engineered that back to, discipline and small wins. The other thing is accountability. You got to have somebody in your corner.
Yeah.
You're going to have days where it's just not going to be fun to do what you need to do, but you've got to have a buddy or a friend or a group that's going to be like, hey, you meeting us at the park today? You meeting us at the gym today? We going on a bike ride today? And if you're like, nah, man, I don't really feel like it. And that friend has to turn around and be like, hey, get off your ass and meet me in the park.
Yep.
Okay. Because if you don't do it, then you're going to let me not do it next time. And we're not getting anywhere. So you have to have some accountability. And that's why personal training, like I didn't ask anybody to do anything that they couldn't have Googled and looked up on their own.
Yep.
Right. But they knew that there was a financial investment, which is oftentimes leads to an emotional investment. And if they don't show up for that session, I'm like, hey, I'm keeping your money and you just lost an hour. And if you do it again next week, you're fired. So like, show up.
Yeah.
You got to show up. And I think that's really it. You've got to just be able to show up every day. And on the days that you don't want to show up, you've got to have somebody that will drag you out.
And that's where I think that community part becomes so important, right? You're much more likely to reach those goals if you have somebody that you're working out with, that you don't want to disappoint. When you, I've worked out with folks, really early in the morning, and how awful is that if somebody else woke up at 4:30 and you don't show up because you just didn't feel like getting out of bed that day.
What people don't understand is that once you go through this, like there is kind of a critical mass, like exit velocity. So exit velocity is when, the rockets have gone fast enough that they're out of the orbit, right? They've reached a high enough speed that gravity doesn't affect them anymore. So you're going to hit this kind of exit velocity in your discipline where you become the person that's helping others.
Absolutely.
Like at some point you will get disciplined enough where you don't need this. It just becomes who you are. And then you're able to pass this on to someone else. So you're going to need someone to help you get there. And eventually you'll become the person that's helping others, right? Absolutely. You'll hit that exit velocity in terms of mental strength and discipline. And then you are the accountability coach for someone else. So I think that's important to know, is that it's not always going to be that hard, but it definitely is a retraining, a rewiring of who you are. And that's why people start it, because they want to become a better person in some shape, form, or fashion. So you got to tally up the small wins. You got to get consistency. You've got to have an accountability coach. And then you become the person, a better person that then can provide that to someone else. And I think that's what we really need to focus on, because that keeps it going. And, we're making the world a better place, right?
Absolutely. Justin, I love it. I appreciate the time and conversation. Where one of the things you said that I think is really going to stick with me, that I hope also our listeners will think about, is you said championships aren't won on home runs, they're won on base hits. And so when we think about building community, when we think about failure, when we think about the choices that we have to make every day, I think of those as kind of the base hits. And so I would encourage anybody who's listening or watching to ask yourself, what base hits are you going to make today? What things are you going to do to get a little uncomfortable, so that you're not living in this world of comfort anymore? Justin, thank you a million times over for joining the show. That does it for us here today. Thanks everybody for tuning in. I would ask you that, do what the kids are doing these days. I think they're smashing the like buttons, they're sharing it, they're downloading the episodes. Keep doing that. And let me know what from this conversation you took the most from. Comment below, send me an email, tweet, all the social media profiles that you need to reach out. Thank you so much for tuning in. And just as a reminder, in case you needed it, folks, at the end of the day, we're all human. And if we choose to find the good in the situation, I promise you, you're going to find what you're looking for. Thanks everyone for watching.